You're listening to the Flex Success Podcast, where we teach you how to be less shit.
I'm your co-host Lizzie, and this is Dean. We'll be covering all topics relating to health, fitness, and bodybuilding.
Join us as we use our in-the-trenches experience and up-to-date science to provide you with information that you can actually use.
If you like what we do, be sure to give us a like, follow, share, and tag us on social media. Good to see you all again. Hi, Dean.
Hello, Liz.
Listeners, Dean and I were talking about the topics that we wanted to discuss for the next podcast, which I believe is episode 138. And we were like, you know what? That cluster of topics has already been done in a previous episode, which was which one, Dean?
Well, like 115 or something, but a coach's roundtable with Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization, and then also Joe Jeffery from here over in the UK, which is awesome.
Yeah, Physique Collective, Joe Jeffery is from. And so we thought, you know what, instead of reinventing the wheel, why don't we replay that episode? I did not have the good luck to be in that episode, but I did listen to it and it was fantastic. Dean, wet the whistle of our listeners. Give us a little preview of what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any questions or queries or concerns about like how much volume is too much or too little volume in regards to training sets, that's in there. How to determine whether or not maybe you might shift load up versus training closer to failure. Is training closer to failure actually worth it? And then what are the differences between different deloads? Every question that we always get asked repeatedly around how to manipulate training to maximize hypertrophy, that's the sort of podcast major topic. We touched on it both in an off-season setting, and then we even touched on it in a prep setting with regards to managing fatigue and you know, which lever would you pull on? Like, would you, again, pull further away from failure at the back end of a prep, or would you go closer? All questions that people have, and there's plenty of answers in there around that. So it's a good one. I mean, it's a great one.
I feel whistles have been sufficiently wet. Thank you, Dean. Maybe we'll just get straight into it, shall we?
Yeah, I was going to say, if it's not enough yet, we even talked about diet drugs. And here's the kicker for people to really listen out for. Mike Israetel called evidence-based lifters pussies.
Oh.
So find out why he may have that opinion.
Can I just say, when people say pussies, they mean someone who's weak. And really, we should be saying testicles, because those are sensitive. And like, if a pussy, it's not a weak thing. It pushes out an actual human and then recovers.
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue, unlike testicles. They do that in real life, but to say someone is a testicle, it's not the same. But I'm still pushing for it.
Yeah, I'm gonna switch to testicle from here on out. That's what I'm doing.
Done. You heard it here first.
All right, listeners, enjoy the episode.
All right, welcome back, Flex Success listeners. We have an absolute doozy, as we would say in Australia. I don't know if you say that in the UK or in America, but we have a doozy of a podcast today. It's the first coaches roundtable, is what we're calling it. We've had a couple of bodybuilding roundtables with some of the clients and that we have here at Flex. We are joined by Mr. Joe Jeffery and Mr. Mike Israetel, and of course, Flex Coach George. Welcome, boys.
Howdy. I didn't know this was the first coaches roundtable. I've obviously listened to and really enjoyed your roundtables that you've done thus far. I would say all of those guys are also coaches, though, are they not?
Pretty much, yeah. But, we wanted to go to that sort of top tier OnlyFans type coach. That's why we got Mike on.
We're top tier, Mike. We're top tier.
Yikes. So it's actually a really interesting podcast to kick off too, because I was thinking about this today. I was like, all right, so for those that aren't aware, I originally engaged Joe, you, for your services as a coach, and you took me to my bodybuilding comp last year, my last one, to a career best look. And then it's come full circle now where I'm doing your nutrition modifications for your current approach to training. Joe coaches George. Joe used to get programming from Jared, who's from Renaissance Periodization under Mike. Now he's coaching Jared.
Nutrition, MPD.
And Mike, you consult with Joe too, as far as I'm aware. So it is truly the coaches roundtable.
Yeah. The circle jerk, one might say.
I mean, that's how you should always kick off a podcast, is a circle jerk, because then everybody's feeling welcome and ready to go.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Ever been involved in a circle jerk before, Mike?
I mean, like countless circle jerks. What a ridiculous question.
Real ones. Not metaphorical ones.
No, for real, for real. Yeah, the ookie cookie, where you all jerk on a cookie and the last guy to ejaculate summarily eats the cookie.
Awesome.
What did you call that? Ookie cookie?
Ookie cookie.
Okay, in
Common
Australia,
childhood game in America.
childhood game. Okay, that's a little bit of a difference. So how does one jerk off a child and do that is the question.
No, the
But-
children are jerking off themselves. They are the ones that gather for the cookie.
We call it a soggy sayo in Australia because we have a biscuit which is called a sayo, and it's called the soggy sayo.
And children gather around with their best friends in order to ejaculate on this sayo. Yes.
Usually, we would say it's the private all boys schools that play rugby union. You know, it's part of the what do you call it? Like, what do they call it in America when you go to like a college, like an initiation?
Harry Potter. Oh, I see. Yes. Yes. They're rushing the fraternity or whatever.
I mean, what a way to kick off a podcast. This is how professional it's going to get. In case you were wondering, Mike, we don't swear on here and we don't say naughty words and we don't talk about jerking children.
Okay.
Can you really not swear on this podcast?
Of course. if we can talk about circle jerking children, it's
listen, you can say a lot, especially in America. I feel like the home of radical leftism, children jerking each other off doesn't seem that extreme.
Yeah, it's actually just quite. We're trying to bring children into. I'm done. I am not going to get canceled today. I had all sorts of things to say. I wouldn't.
All right. Well, instead of talking about children, let's talk about maximizing hypertrophy. The cool thing about, I think, the coaching collection that we have on here today is, there's a strong focus on training, because obviously Renaissance Periodization has the training app. You obviously have your nutrition app as well, and then we've got Joe, who's coaching bodybuilders and all sorts of life, and myself and George. So I thought I would open this with a very open-ended question. I'll push it to you, Mike, and then we can just see where it goes. With regards to weight training, why can't we say that a particular thing is the most important? I.e., you hear camps that might say load is the most important, or volume is the most important, or proximity to failure is the most important. Why would it be ill-advised or impossible for us to say that dogmatically? That, or maybe it is, and I'm wrong.
Yeah. It's definitely possible to say that it is most important, but you have to define what you mean by most important, because importance can be such a diffuse quality as to be well defined in some context by how much does the average person get impressed by it. Like if you asked, is Lady Gaga important? A lot of people would say yes, she's a celebrity. But if aliens came down and said, what is her function? Is it important to the survival of society? We'd say, well, no, not by that metric, I guess. So I think it's true to say that some of the variables of hypertrophy training are more fundamental than others, and that going one way or another on them would throw the training off to a great extent. One example is proximity to failure. If you don't have a good proximity to failure, then none of the other variables really matter all that much. Put it another way, if your proximity to failure is sufficiently wrong, no amount of load or volume can save you. Another one is load. Yes, it is very untrue to say that load is more important than volume if your extreme example is one rep max repetition and then you leave, clearly superior on load, versus 10 sets at 80% of 1 RM, close to failure. Obviously, the latter is much more hypertrophic, but doesn't have as much load. But if you look at it from a what has to check the box perspective, well, load has to be at least as heavy as XYZ and not so heavy as to be too heavy to do other things with. And thus, load kind of sets your boundary conditions. And so the way I like to think about it is kind of in a 3-tiered system. Tier 1 is the realization that you have to go hard, which means pushing yourself, which means going close to failure. That's probably most fundamental. Next, you have to pick a load that is roughly between 5 and 30 repetitions. Of course, there's nuance around that, and it's not exactly those numbers, but sufficiently heavy to do the job, not too light, not too heavy. And then after that, volume becomes by far the most important variable of interest. Now, of course, there's also frequency to contend with and a bunch of other contextualizations. But if you said that volume was your first variable of interest, you could be correct if you sort of rejiggered the equation to have the others as second and third. But I think the others are possibly more theoretically primal in nature, more foundational in nature. It's also very rare that you would not understand what load you're lifting before you determined a volume for it. I'd be curious to say 3 sets of 20 reps, and someone's like, okay, at what load? Like, that's already kind of inscribed. You know what I mean? The load is kind of inscribed in there. So I think if you go about it in a careful, measured sort of fundamental approach, you can say one of them, the things is more important, just because it's more fundamental. I think it's actually true to say that the foundation of a house is more important than the roof, simply because you can have a foundation without a roof, but you can't have a roof without a foundation because there's nothing to build on. Now, that kind of intellectual preeminence or importance is neat to make YouTube videos about and talk about general theory, but I think a lot of people mean something else when they say important. They mean, what effect does it have on the overall outcome if I alter this variable? And then really it's very contextual, and all of the variable alterations matter to some extent, and it just matters on degree. So if you say, well, proximity to failure, how important is that? Well, it depends on how much you move it around. If you go to 8 RIR and everything, insanely important. You're losing a ton of gains. If it's modulating between 3, 2, 1, and 0 RIR, it almost doesn't matter. If you're looking at load on the bar, anything between roughly 5 and 30 repetitions is very, very unimportant to overall results. So any movement of the needle between 7 rep sets and 27 rep sets and being very concerned about how that affects hypertrophy is overstating the case for how important that is. At the same time, volume has an interesting one where it has much more of an impact in effect based on its variability, even in realistic situations. 1 versus 2 versus 4 versus 6 versus 12 sets per session or per week have a huge differential impact on hypertrophy. So when people say volume is king, they're not completely incorrect, even though volume is not as fundamentally primal. You have to get the load right, and you've got to go close to failure. And then volume makes a really big difference. Whereas so long as you get close to failure, and so long as you get the load into a very wide range, the smaller changes within those don't really matter much. It's kind of like if you're looking to date girls and you're looking to date pretty girls, someone could say, okay, how female do they need to be? You're like, anything that checks the box is female enough. And then, well, how pretty do they need to be? Well, okay, yeah, that matters a lot, right? There's a very big range of something that looks like me to something that looks like a pretty girl. And then, any movement up and down that range is very meaningful. But something like how female, it's like, well, as long as it's generally in the category of female, like, some girls have a deeper voice, gives a flying fuck, like, whatever. What about, some girls look a little more masculine or more feminine? Don't care, as long as they're hot, they check the box. I'm man enough that anything sufficiently below my masculinity, I count as female. Fellas, I'm going to jail. Bunch of the twinks, they're girls to me. You hear me? I'm kidding, mostly. I don't know how you guys do jail in Australia and the UK. Australia is a giant jail anyway, and the UK, look at Joe Jeffery, how derelict he looks. Joe, how many prison tattoos and Nazi memorabilia do you have tattooed on yourself?
I have to keep that top secret information to retain clients.
My man. So in any case, that's my... Say what?
I'm podcasting from jail right now.
My man, that's a nice jail.
I am married, Mike.
Oh, that's right. The Grand Jail. Good God, this got really dark. And I went to jail, and it still got darker. Thanks, Joe.
And it's the metaphorical, like, Australian jail, in that there's the ball and chain that would have came with them as convicts to the land that is Australia. It's all intertwined.
Yeah, 100%. So anyway, that's my long-winded way of saying that importance can be very contextual, but it's important to understand that some variables, you just need to get them into that range, and there's a plateau-like effect. So basically, anything like, if you have a variable that stretches from here to here on its spectrum, some variables are like, it sucks, good, pretty even, and then sucks again. And then some variables have a very steady rise and a very steady fall, so moving up and down on them is really important. There's obviously other considerations for how that works. Like if you want to say I want to go out to get Indian food in London, so long as it's Indian food, that variable doesn't, like how Indian isn't really, you can ask that question because sometimes the menus are all in the local language, the people barely speak the shit, versus like, oh, it's very American or Britishized, this third generation, all the Indian servers talk to you in Cockney accent and you're like, wow, this isn't really Indian. But that doesn't really matter much probably. But then like, how good is the food? How well is it rated on Yelp? Like, okay, that really matters. But if you say like, oh, like, so Indian doesn't matter much, you'd be like, yes, and someone misunderstands you, they're like, well, just go get Japanese food. You're like, no. It has to be Indian, but it's not important how Indian. So when someone says, how much does load matter for hypertrophy? Well, anything between roughly 5 and 30 reps there's really kind of no wrong answers. And if you perseverate on the specifics of, well, 15 to 20 or 10 to 15, you may be misusing your time. Whereas if you have a program that has some amount of volume, how much volume matters a lot. And if you say to someone, well, how much volume are you doing? Fuck, doesn't matter, bro. Just fucking hit the weights, shut the fuck up. You're like, okay, sweet. Well, whatever, we're just doing whatever, which is why a lot of the one set to failure guys, like, it's cool. You're trying. I get it. It's emotional. It's fun. But maybe you need to do 3 or 4 or 5 more sets in order to elicit the best gains. I know you might not want to do that, but volume is that important in this context.
Do you think that's even more so the case because volume allows you to shift that needle even further from a progressive perspective?
Further compared to what?
Like, so if you have the one set top set to failure kind of guys that are just solely focused on running the red limit with regards to reps in reserve and proximity to failure, so they've ticked that box. They've ticked the load box for the 5 to 30 reps sort of approach. But the ability to progress there beyond is solely reliant on either nervous system adaptations, more muscle, more effort. Whereas if you add additional volume, that magnitude of that needle shifting towards a hypertrophic stimulus is likely going to be greater.
If you start out at very low volumes that are not so hypertrophic, that's absolutely correct. And a lot of the guys, I think, are trying to make up for the lack of volume intuitively by over-indexing on relative effort. So they'll say, look, every given set, the closer we take it to failure and even beyond, the more hypertrophic that set becomes. So the total number of sets you have to include in a program to fill the cup of hypertrophy stimulus that you can fill in any one workout, the fewer of those sets we have to have. And that's not wrong, except they might be costing themselves a huge deal of fatigue that they don't have to cost themselves. And something of a more moderated approach might be better. The alternative is also probably poor stimulus to fatigue ratio. If you're saying, okay, I'm going to stop every single set at 5 reps in reserve or even 6, but I'm going to do 15, 20, 30 sets per workout. You start to experience a fatigue in the gym of monotony of just being there. You guys ever had that experience where you're like, how many fucking sets do I have? Fuck this. Like at the end of a mesocycle, you're like, oh, yeah. You look at your sheet, you look at the RP app and it's like 6 sets of bicep curls. You're like, man, what? And you think like, man, if I could just really try hard for like 1 or 2 sets, couldn't I get all the gains? And the thing is, neither extreme works optimally. So if you're just grinding your shit down into 1 set, you're going to get much more hypertrophy in that 1 set than most people even get out of 2 or 3 sets, but you're not going to get 4 or 5 sets of hypertrophy out of it. And so if you do 1 set and then leave the gym, it's fun. It's, Viking and shit, but, and you get decent gains, probably not your best gains. On the other hand, if you do, 20 sets of 6 RER work, you'll get good gains, but not ideal gains. And again, your stimulus to fatigue ratio is not ideal because the monotony is just going to kill you after a few weeks. Never mind, maybe even like joint wear and tear because you're physically like doing way more work. And your joints don't really have a mechanism by which they even detect proximity to failure because all the forces are the same to them. It's the chronic, constant moving. If you do 20 sets of cable pushdowns, that beats up your joints way more, regardless of RIR, than doing 3 sets of cable pushdowns, but really close to failure. Because this shit right here, when it's really close, the joint forces are really just dictated by the loads and velocities involved. You might even go so far as to say something very close to failure stresses your joints less because the velocity is much less and the joint just pulling where it's supposed to. So it ends up being that the reality of optimizing all the variables is probably closer to an even mix of them. So like we don't always go to failure, but pretty close to failure on average. And where volume is something that starts out on the lower end, we don't need a lot of volume, but where if our body's showing us that they can recover from more and more stimulus is theoretically possible to elicit, you can increase the volume quite a bit. And thus sort of moderate volumes with 1 or 2 reps in reserve is my best bet as kind of on my coaching side of being a scientist at what for most people is going to result in the best gains, because it doesn't lead you to push in one direction excessively in what seems like a rear guard defense against criticism of saying, well, look, you're not doing enough. Yeah, but we go really hard per set. It's like, yeah, but is that really the best way to do it? It's like you have like a station wagon car when someone's like, it's not fast enough. Like, now it's got a V12. You're like, yeah, the race car would do better. Why are you doing this to a V12, to a station wagon, for the love of God? Or you get a race car and you're like, I hollowed out the back so that we could put groceries in it. Like, Jesus Christ, you ruined a race car for this? Like, just get whatever one of those, like, I don't know, the Porsche SUVs. It's real fast and you can throw the kids in there if you happen to have children. And then you're driving down the freeway and you're like, I don't even know the names of my children. What the fuck has my life become?
Because you named your Lamborghini or your Porsche first.
Oh, those are my most beautiful possessions, of course.
Like Joe, obviously Mike's mentioned from a load perspective, 5 to 30 reps. Do you find a range that great to be effective in application when it comes to programming for clients? If we're assuming, just to caveat that we're also recognizing that proximity to failure is important and that it may become increasingly more difficult to get accurate RIRs at the top end of those rep ranges.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you'd probably agree with this, because I think that you program this way as well yourself, Dean. Like, when things start getting north of 15 reps for a lot of movements, accurately predicting RIR can be a little bit difficult for some individuals. I would say the way that I self-select or would recommend selecting rep range for individuals would purely be based on their own individual stimulus to fatigue ratio for that movement. I think there's certainly, we could postulate benefits of using a great variety of rep ranges, although I think that's probably pretty far down the totem pole in terms of importance. Like for me, historically, I've torn a supraspinatus tendon. I've got terrible shoulders, many shoulder injuries over my life before lifting. If I dumbbell press like anything, definitely less than 10 reps, I'm mostly in the 15 to 20, then I'm screwed, but I have a fantastic stimulus to fatigue ratio there. Hey, look, if you've got good stability and you can do 6 to 8 rep dumbbell presses and get a great stimulus from it, then, have at it. But I think it's an individual equation mostly. But yeah, to answer your question, it can be problematic in the higher rep ranges for some individuals on some exercises, I think.
And then, so do you minimize noise, I suppose, or potential error there by similarly like programming in a relatively shorter rep range for most people? Like, it's very infrequent that I would program somebody in the 20 rep plus range. And if it is, it's probably something like an isolated bicep curl or something to the tune of that.
Yeah, biceps or lateral delts, maybe something like giant sets if we're using very short rep times and rest times. Sorry, yeah, I might head up close to the 20 to 30 rep range, but rarely.
Yeah, George, you find similar?
Yeah, the only real disparity I have around this is clients coming back to me and going, oh, well, this data told me that if I do 20 to 30 reps, that my fatigue is going to be fucking huge here up through the roof, and that I should probably do more like lower range sets to apply that stimulus in a better fashion and get more out of my training blocks that way by only doing lower rep range. Or they want to just go in like one camp or the other to avoid or mitigate a problem that they perceive that's not actually there. But generally, just a general guideline of rep ranges that's applicable for the movement. Thinking again back to genetic individuality, joint fatigue, tendon and ligament fatigue, pre-existing injuries, all things to consider in that equation, and just taking anecdotal response from training performance over time to change things in intermittently as they need to be adjusted.
Yeah, I think that's a Paul Carterism, isn't it? You should only train with 5 to 8 reps because it's more fatiguing, more centrally fatiguing to train with higher reps or something like this, is the claim. Emphasis on claim.
Sooner or later, I'll find out why people consider Paul Carter an authority.
It's interesting. It's an interesting analysis of human behavior to look at his Instagram, because it's a swath of he's going to see this and call me out, but fucking, it's a swath of nonsense. And anybody writing in the comments, no matter how feeble or honest the comment is in any kind of disagreement to him, it's a heavy emotional attack. Yes. And it's an interesting look at human psychology to think, this person would be a credible individual to follow to these people.
So why might his claim be unreasonable with regards to choosing repetition ranges based on the level of fatigue that they generate?
Can I speak to this?
Yes, sir.
On paper, it sounds very reasonable. On paper, it sounds exactly like the stimulus to fatigue ratio, except at least two things are absent. One is any convincing attempt to persuade that sets of 5 to 8 are necessarily lower in whatever kind of fatigue. I have not found that to be universally the case. But very quickly, there are different types of fatigue. Joint and connective tissue fatigue is going to be maximum in sets of 5 to 8. Sets of 20, they're not going to hurt your joints. So all of a sudden, that's a different conversation. So a bit of a lack of nuance there. And two is what George and Joe already alluded to, is that individual differences and even all the way down to the exercise, to the movement type, to the muscle being trained, to the phase of periodization or just for variation's sake. Sometimes your delts grow really well from sets of 5 to 10. And then after a few months, it's like, eh. And then you switch to sets of 10 or 15 to 20, and your delts just blow up again. So there's variation at every level, including between individuals. So telling people that sets of 5 to 8, when we know direct literature says roughly equivalent hypertrophy in the medium term from sets of 5 to 30, proposing that sets of 5 to 8 are superior in stimulus to fatigue ratio, I think it's just like, first of all, not in evidence, and second of all, not in implication. I've thought through this quite a bit. I've coached lots of folks. I've seen lots of training. If someone was like 5 to 8 is the best range, right? I'd be like, I'd really like to know your reasoning for concluding that, because first, no, and second of all, why? But the why you'll never really get from Paul Carter, because he'll block you before he can explain it, and he's not sufficiently in the know to explain something cogently that cannot be cogently explained.
I think this is similar to, on the line of fatigue, the claim of the completely unnecessary need to ever deload. Is it because nervous system fatigue doesn't accumulate, or something like, is this the claim? And you think, has these people ever trained with any degree of seriousness for any length of time to say you never need to deload? Like, yeah, I'm sure you're going in there and you're doing like 2 sets per body part per session. Totally, yeah, I'm sure you don't need to deload,
right?
You know.
But even then, on that, Joe, my experience with individuals that have claimed that is there's usually two things that I find. One, you speak to somebody about the importance of proximity to failure and how to maybe manage fatigue long term so that they don't beat themselves up. But like, you need to be at least this close, but you don't need to be on the red line all the time. And the answer is generally like, I'd just rather train to failure. RIR in bunny quotes doesn't work. And it's because their relative failure is actual, or their perceived failure, I should say, is relatively speaking more like the 2 and 3 and 4 reps from failure. So they don't really ever reach beyond the initial RIR. And instead, when they try and train with an RIR, they train well below that RIR because their perceived fatigue is greater. And then the second thing to that is that they almost always, without knowing, call it intuitively or even just like reactively, deload in a manner that they had to do. Like, they've gone in and they're not following a program like an A1 through D1 through E1. They're just going in and have adding it, right? And then they go in the next week, instead of RDLing at the start, they by default feel fucked. So they RDL at the end. And then they RDL half the weight and they stay 5. So they end up deloading anyway. They just don't call it that.
Yeah. Yeah. People that say they don't need to deload, automatically to me, I know something is wrong with your training design, or we have a big nomenclature problem where you call something that's an off week or 4 days where you only trained once a little bit in a hotel gym and then you come back and hit it again. You don't call that a deload. It is a deload. So a lot of times people just aren't in the name. But I think a lot of what tends to happen is there are pretty common reasons why people say certain things and why they like certain ways of training. And those reasons, I think, have scarcely little to do with information on exercise science or experience in the gym. I think a huge fraction of those reasons have to do with psychology, ego, and masculinity and therapy and things like that. I think the intersection that predicts best that you will like low volume to failure is if you have a lot of demons you're trying to get out in the training process, but you're also not particularly hardworking. So you get to show off a little bit, lift heavy, go really hard, get the demons out, and then you don't have to do a whole lot more sets because you're not really that hardworking to begin with. So a lot of the bros who are not known for particularly being very hardworking or diligent or conscientious, but want to really show off and really push it and scream and let memories of their dad beating them sort of fall into the ether bit by bit, then yes, 1 set to failure, 2 sets to failure is fucking awesome. You're a warrior. Here's your gold star. And, on the other hand, a huge fraction of people that choose to train with reps in reserve are people who would much rather overthink their training and layer in needless intellectualization versus just actually working hard and also intellectualizing on top of that. It's unfortunate because as a representative of the science-based lifting community, it's painful for me to admit that a huge fraction, maybe not the majority, but a huge fraction of people that say they're evidence-based are just like, well, pussies, for lack of a better term, and use that evidence-based shit to replace actual fucking work. But, believe it or not, you can combine the best elements of both and go sufficiently close to failure as literature dictates to get best results, do the number of sets the literature dictates you should based on auto-regulation, and whatever it is reason you're in the gym is replaced with, I'm here to grow as much muscle as possible, but I'm going to do whatever that takes to be best long-term. Like it's the difference between a professional basketball player practicing every part of his game that makes sense to practice with the guidance of a coach versus someone who plays street ball and just likes to practice dunks because it really feels good to dunk. And you've got someone who doesn't practice dunks because they're scared of hurting themselves. So they pretend that they're going to focus a lot on dribbling and passing because they're too big of a pussy to take the fucking ball into downtown, so to speak. So a lot of this is just psychological. I mean, look at Paul Carter shit. It's all fucking psychological. The guy's just screaming on about masculinity and dumb shit like that all the fucking time. There's very little to do with actual science and training. Not a lot of thought going on. Tons of feelings going on. And that's how a huge fraction of people end up being in camps, Yeah, man, 5 to 8. Why? It's fucking heavy, man. You know what I mean? None of this fucking pussy shit. Like, oh, I gotcha. That's all the thinking you've ever done about this. I understand. And any more thinking is usually layered on top as, once you've come to a conclusion, you have to rationalize it. I think that's most of that comes along. So,
yeah, I think it's really interesting to take the psychological approach to, in fact, Dean, like back to your very first question where you asked about what are the most important variables. So another way to think of importance could be value. What are the most valuable inputs to us? And so much of our values, subconsciously or otherwise, are based on preference, right? So for example, this is a philosophical metaphor that's been used time and time again, but if I have this Pepsi Max bottle here and I asked you what value it was, probably wouldn't be a lot. If I said this belonged to Ronnie Coleman and you're the biggest Ronnie Coleman fan ever, then it's suddenly gone up in value, right? But it's the same bottle that it was previously. Just like if we're talking about objective facts, the volume has the same outcome as evidenced by the literature now, but your personal preference has shifted the value of that thing upwards. If you hate Ronnie Coleman, it's probably worth even less, So it's almost this pillar of value, of importance that exists outside of the objective importance of the effect of the thing. Did that make sense?
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, because that is, most people are bought in on the association with being either camp failure or camp, let's call RIR or volume, which is a shame because they can obviously both pull from each other, and then it's about finding the balance between those two as unique individuals as everybody has used terminology wise so far today.
Yeah, so drawing importance outside of objective facts to the value of volume, frequency, effort locks people into these things, be it for good or for bad, which is interesting, but obviously occurs, especially here in England.
Oh yeah,
you are the camp of top set back off.
Yeah, well, I think I was one of the, I don't want to say one of the first, but maybe the first coach that coached big enhanced competitors that would speak on a more, and this turn of phrase, I don't know if this is so suitable, but evidence-based front in a landscape, in an environment that was extremely emotionally driven by a certain dogma of training. And on the one hand, it was great service. It worked incredibly well for business. And on the other hand, it made me public enemy number one to a group of people. It was really interesting to watch that because for me, it was purely about outcome goals.
I thought that's why we're doing all this.
Yeah, well,
you want the muscular body, yes. You should do what you're supposed to do to get the body, yes. Is there anything else you want? Have a lot of feelings, I guess. That's back to that.
Yeah, and I think I had some kind of almost juvenile ignorance towards how emotional people were towards these things that I learned at that time,
Holy shit. Would you get a lot of clapback, so to speak?
I think I did before I proved myself as a coach. Like George, you remember because I've coached you for years. maybe 5 years ago, I was coaching full time, but I wasn't coaching professionals on international stages and things like that. And, you hear me, I'm not a super heavyweight bodybuilder talking about training with reps in reserve. They think, who's this doofus? This isn't the way we do it, so we don't like it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
You at
deep
least don't
thoughts
look like
coming out of
Harry
that
Potter.
camp.
You at least don't look. I say you at least don't look like Harry Potter, because it would have made it a lot harder for you. You've at least got that, that card to play.
You look like an adult male.
I've got a tattoo on my face, so I try to be a little bit frightening to some degree.
One of the bigger issues for what happened in the UK was obviously Dorian mentality, just minimal work, maximal effort, that then trickled down into the youngsters that looked up to him as a figure of influence. And all of the top pros in the UK all had a similar mentality and mantra to training, which was go in, 1 or 2 sets to failure, give everything you got, leave everything on the table and come away from that. And Joe was, like you said, he was probably one of the first people that really started to challenge that on a respectable and educational level. And there was obviously a massive backlash, because there's all these youngsters coming up that have this emotional attachment now to training, because that's how the pro does it. That's how I should obviously replicate that training. And I'm obviously going to get exactly the same results as him, who's now running 12 IU of GH, God knows how many PEDs, and has been training for 15 years. That was what we was fighting against, what Joe originally was fighting at in the industry of the UK. And I think it still goes on to this day, but now we've got, I think it might be something to do with UK culture and how we are wired, but we have to attach ourselves. And I was no different before I started with Joe. I was the typical trainer, 1 to 2 sets, and hence why I had legs no bigger than my forearm at the time. Go in and do 1 set or 2 sets of barbell squats to pretty shit depth, and wonder why that 200 kg wasn't really giving me big legs. So there was a lot of emotional attachment. I think we're very emotional as a country, really.
How interesting, isn't it? Or how naive is it that we so frequently say things like, look at how Dorian did it and success leaves clues. It's like, what about the rest of the bodybuilders that were better than Dorian, like Jay Cutler? Why?
That's a sore spot, Joe. You're not supposed to mention Jay Cutler, who's on record, by the way, I think on Fuad's podcast, saying he never trained to failure really ever a single time. It's like fucking crickets after that shit. So yeah, totally. Kevin Levrone, Flex Wheeler. How did Flex Wheeler train? I don't even know really. Paul Dillette. Those guys were all unbelievable. What happened with, how did Lee Haney train? Lee Haney's dominant. Anyone ask that question? I think is Lee Haney trained in a very conventional way, multiple sets, close to failure but not exactly failure, boring compound movements. There's nothing spicy to take away from that. And I think Dorian had the first inkling of spicy. Never mind the fact that Dorian actually did roughly 14 work sets per muscle per week, if you dope it all out. But guys will take from that what they need to. So they'll say, yeah, 1 or 2 sets, let's call it 1 set to failure, and that's good enough. So you have some guys that really lean into that ultra high intensity, very low volume, and it's just a lot of feelings. Now, in their defense, sometimes people are faster twitch in their muscular composition. And for some muscles, especially for beginners and intermediates, very little training can actually be very close to optimal. And it's fun, which keeps you coming back, which is great. But at some point, to me, there's kind of 2 conversations about what you can do. One is, what is some stuff you can do to have fun in the gym that works really well? It's a big universe of stuff. Then there's another question of, gun to your head, you have to win the Mr. UK or whatever in 1 year. How are you going to train? Aliens are coming down, they're going to blow up the United Kingdom if you fucking lose. How are you going to train? Is it going to be for your emotions, or is it going to be like, oh, I need scientists and shit to tell me what to do? This is like the Manhattan Project type of shit. Well, then you're going to think through the shit, and you're probably not going to do nearly as much shit by how it feels, and much more about well, how does it go through autoregulation? What does the evidence say? And how can we make sure that this process results in the most hypertrophy possible? Which at the end of the day, I think all competition bodybuilders, obviously winning the competition is not as important as saving Her Majesty's United Kingdom. But gentlemen, I don't mean to offend. The Australians love it. Oh, fuck the Queen. Just kidding. You guys are good with the Queen in Australia, or no?
There are royalists, but we could care less. I would say collectively.
We don't have a queen anymore. It's the king's coming.
I know, it's fucked up. RIP. But yeah, when you're 5th or 3rd or 2nd, how you trained is a very small consolation to that you did not win. And if someone asks you, real talk, is your training absolutely 100% tailored to maximize your probability of victory? If they really sat with that thought for a second, the folks that are in camps, they might be like, no, I know I like to train in a certain way, It doesn't really have much to do with winning and losing. I just really love training like that. Well, that's cool, but just shut the fuck up about it then. Stop recommending it to other people as a superior way to train, because it's not. It's just some shit you like to do. But most of those people are not interested in admitting that they just like to do it, and that's why they do it, because they haven't admitted that to themselves. Also, they don't want to discover a frightening idea. A frightening idea is this: that the way they would best be off training to maximize their results is not the way that they find very fun at all. And that will turn their passion into their chore. And they don't want the cognitive dissonance of having to push that out. So they're going to want to continue to tell themselves the way I train is optimal. And that way I can get alignment on loving my training, training hard, doing shows, and having confidence on stage that I'm doing what is best for me to succeed. It's tough to be able to be like, well, actually, if you're really trying your best, you do a few other things that you don't like to do. Like, oh, God damn it. I knew this was going to become a fucking job as opposed to a passion. And that's tough. And I feel that. But when you're communicating to folks all around and telling them this is how you should train, it might be helpful to tell them, like, well, like, you don't actually have to train like this. It's really fun, though. But here's what science says about the other ways that work. And if you want to try this one, it'd be a little bit more fun than the others.
So how might someone find out if they should do more than what they are currently doing?
You can use your stimulus proxies to assess adaptation pretty accurately.
Save all the thinking from the process and sign up to the RP Strength app.
Or just get the RP Hypertrophy app. You know,
damn, fellas.
Well, I've got some very interesting anecdotes of the Hypertrophy app and how they link to the psychology of bodybuilders now that I've implemented the app into competitive bodybuilding clients, males and females.
I'm curious, Joe. Please tell.
I think you probably expect the outcome. So on my check-in sheets, as George and Dean know, I collect data on training across all of the stimulus proxies that you would use at RP, you know, pump, soreness, we track progression, we try to fit a progression model of a certain percentage of load increment with max reps or whatever over an accumulated mesocycle, whatever. And what I found is two issues. One, the client lies because their psychology rationalizes, even subconsciously, the want for them to do more because it should correlate with more, but doesn't necessarily in the long term, if that makes sense. Or they would leave their sheet until check-in day, and then they were going, was that sore? I don't know if that was sore. I don't think that was sore. I don't think I got a great pump there. So they're not logging an intra-session like the app asked. Now, what I've seen from the app implemented into clients' mesocycles following exactly the same stimulus proxies that we would track is that the app holds their volume much lower than we would have accumulated up to the end of a mesocycle, because they're accurately tracking in that moment. Because when they've finished a big leg session immediately and they're asked, how difficult was that? They're like, that was fucking hard. 4 days later, they're like, yeah, I don't think that wasn't too bad. You know, I could do more than that, you know? Yeah. It's been fantastic. It's been especially fantastic for people like my wife, who she loves competing. She loves bodybuilding. She doesn't like training.
Interesting.
Yeah, she has no interest in mechanics or the science of hypertrophy and things like that. She likes to look the way that she wants to look to be competitive. She likes winning. I wouldn't say she doesn't like training. Maybe that's the wrong turn of phrase. It's
the intricacies of training.
Exactly. The nuance of training that we all love and are passionate about, she could care less. So when I'm asking her at check-ins, well, how sore did this thing get? And that's like, I don't know. I don't know. How hard was this? I don't know. You know, but the app there and then, it's absolutely her progress. She's done 3 full mesocycles on it now, and I've never seen her progress so quickly.
Whoa, cool.
It was impossible to get her to even logbook anything before the app, because she'd do week 1 and she'd be like, oh, I don't know if I can add a rep to this. And it'd be like, she's one of these people like, oh, I don't know if I should add a rep or add a load or whatever. But now she just looks at the app and goes, okay, I just do that.
Just do that.
Yeah.
Man, that's such an interesting piece of feedback. To me, I use the app myself, and I don't want to train without the app anymore because it makes everything so seamless. And the app to me has a couple values personally. One of them is like, it'll progress you when it thinks you need progression. And a lot of times I'm like, fuck, I didn't want to do more. God damn it. Well, the app says, and then I just do it. And of course, it also, you know, with that honesty and rating system, like, yeah, if I had a really big pump after a few sets of quads, like, that's it. I don't really do any more quads next week. And like, wow, that's it. All it takes is 4 sets. Yes, this time that's all it takes. So it's kind of cool to have something both reflect honesty to me and also kind of light a fire under my feet and be like, yep, last time you did 400, this time it's 405. And like, But what about 365 for high reps drop set? You put in 365 and it's great. Now you have 18 reps instead of 12. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
fuck, it has that adjustment. God damn it.
Yes.
It still pushes you to do more and more and more. And when you can't do more, it's clearly obvious because you're like, I was supposed to do 12 reps. It's week 4. I only did 11. I'm obviously overreached. There is no objective of should we deload? What do we do next? Are you performing at the metric? No. Multiple sessions in a row? No. Well, then you're fucking done. What are we doing here? Because a lot of people would shift and be like, time for some burnouts, time for different exercise. And then they just chronically overreach, trying to run away from the fatigue instead of dealing with it up front.
And the built-in deload taper is unbelievably good. So like I'm deloading right now and I'm training push-pull legs, and I've done push-pull legs the first 3 of the deload. And the taper is so damn accurate. You know, it's sufficient for me to go in and move some blood around. I get a very subtle pump, obviously no soreness and whatnot, and feel way better afterwards. You know, it's just so perfect. Whereas previous deloads, I'll be going, no, should I just do that? And
it's the uncertainty.
Yes.
Isn't it? Like, even for us, all of us know what we're doing. We're experts and shit like that. Making your own plan on the fly fucking sucks. It's one of the reasons why having someone else coach you in dieting, even if you know dieting is sweet, because you're just like, just tell me what to do. I know you're going to do the right thing. Choosing, and should I do a rep? Then all that emotion comes back. Am I just being a pussy? Or am I so scared of being a pussy that I'm overreacting, working too hard? All that swirl, the machine doesn't have the swirl. It just goes, just do this. And you're like, okay, sweet. And then it works. And you're like, holy shit, thank God I didn't have to overthink that.
Yeah, this is the exact reason why I wanted to hire Dean to do my nutrition after I stopped coaching him, because you know this, George, and you know this, Dean, definitely. You know, when you've been writing programming all day, you've been doing check-ins all day, I don't want to think about my own programming for 1 second. I just don't care.
Yeah.
You know, so when Dean sends me my diet, I forward it straight to Jazz. I don't even look at it. And then she cooks all my meals. So they just kind of arrive on my desk and I eat them. And I couldn't tell you what calories or macronutrients I'm on.
Oh, you're like
this diet break you just gave me.
Bodybuilder now.
This diet break, I couldn't even tell you what calories, what anything. I've got absolutely no idea. And you know, it's so nice to just, because it's thoughtless.
Well, so, and even Joe, you said today, you're like, oh, how interesting this diet break. I've just managed to do an extra 2,000 to 3,000 steps on my walk that I otherwise normally would have done less of during the diet phase. But had I have asked you last week, do you want to like take a diet break? You would have emotionally were like, no, man, I'm good. I can probably push on.
Yeah, I'd be like, nah, man, pull the calories.
What are the sort of primary factors that are obviously, Mike, they're into the app, so they're going to be your thoughts as well around how do you determine what to do for the deload for somebody who isn't using the app?
I have a very simple deload. Beginner's guide to deloading. Deloads have to do 2 things. 1 is the input and 2 is the output. Input 1 has to be a lot easier than your normal training, perceptively easier. If your deloads is similarly difficult to normal training, you're not deloading. And 2, it has to measurably, obviously reduce fatigue at least every few days while you're in the deload. If your deload is measurably easier than normal training, it will reduce your fatigue. And then, gee whiz, it's very hard for me to criticize, because if you look into the literature, if you look into how to do things, do you do half the load? Is it 2/3 a load? Is it half the reps? Is it 2/3 of the reps? Can you go even a set to failure, but if you drop the volume a ton? And there's kind of like, you know, there's load, there's RIR, and there's total volume, and they all pull this kind of tapestry into a bigger area. And all you need to do in the deload is be like, I don't give a shit if you pull one way, this way. The total tapestry area has to be much lower than the one you have for your normal training. So tapestry, I would say half or less of every average variable, whether it's load, whether it's RIR, whether it's total number of sets. And then there's other smaller details that come in after that. Like, I really highly prefer a reduction in frequency oftentimes for deloading. This isn't something that it's very easy to put in the app. We'll have this advice at some point in the app of consolidating your sessions. So if you have a 20-minute session and then another 20-minute session, just combine them and then don't go to the gym for a few days, because psychologically, even getting out of the gym for a few days can really bring that fire back. You're like, man, I want to be back in the fucking gym. God damn it. It feels like forever. That is also an important thing that is of smaller importance, but can be talked about, but just generally easier. And for folks that are larger and stronger, I think a very prominent reduction in load is important for deloading because of joint connective tissue stress. Some folks are doing what they call devolume, which is like they still go hard, but just a few sets. And listen, to their credit, absolutely it brings down fatigue, because if you cut your volume by a third, oh my God, that's way more recovery capacity. You can start to recover from things that you weren't recovering from before. Your net fatigue will go down. The problem is, while overall average fatigue and most types of fatigue go down, substrate repletion occurs, hormonal fatigue gets ameliorated, your joint and connective tissue fatigue probably either doesn't go down much or at all, or continues to increase. And then if you're really big and strong, that can be a big fucking problem for you, because like if you have a soccer mom, I don't know, you guys use that term? Does soccer mom mean anything to you?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Football mom for these, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Footy MILF maybe might be better.
Footy MILF, I love it. So I watch a lot of English MILF porn, British MILF porn.
The best category.
So good. Yeah.
Not that I watch porn. If my wife watches this, it's
right, of course not.
It's sinful.
Yes. Woo. What the fuck was I talking about?
MILFs. And please do continue.
Big
oh, that's right. Yes. So if one of your clients is right, if your client's a 46-year-old woman who weighs 60 kilos, does she really need to take a lot of weight off the bar during a deload? What the fuck for? Like, her joint integrity and size relative to the loads she's managing externally, or like she could just do her workouts the same every year of her life from now on. You just pull the volume down and you're good to go. But for larger folks, a lot of them are like, I still want to go heavy to feel some manly shit. But the deload really is, if you look down, it's a very big mindset change. It's relaxing big time, really, really, really pulling back, which means almost always, even in contest prep, deloading should coincide with either a slight surplus or a maintenance level of calories in most cases. There are exceptions to that, because you're not pushing on the pedal anymore. And the only question is, how much are you pushing on the brakes? And generally, and I've done quite a bit of lit reviewing on this. I had a talk with kind of the world's expert at the time a few years back on fatigue management, and he has a quote, Dr. Andrew Fry. When you put on it was a summary of many studies they did on fatigue accumulation and deloading. When you put on the brakes, put them on hard. That was his whole summary of more or less his life's work of research. So one of the worst things you can do for yourself is deload at 95% of the cumulative difficulty of your normal program. You're like, I'm deloading, it's easier. Be like, that's the same. I've used this analogy before. You wake up and there's a fire in your bedroom, and it's really close to your bed and it's burning you, and you go, oh, I'll fix this, and you just roll over in your bed to the other side, and you're like, it's better, and you go back to sleep. Like, no, you need to walk out of the house. That's what counts minimally as you treating the fire situation seriously. So those are my general thoughts on deloading. Sorry to rant so much.
Two things to mention. I've had to check myself and clients on that, put the brakes on hard before. Well, you get 4 days into the deload, I think, yeah, I feel like I can go again now, and you go, hold on. It's much more beneficial long term to rest longer than necessary.
Yes.
Or longer than perceived necessary. One thing that you mentioned on consolidation of sessions in deloads that I've been doing with clients, I'd love to know your thoughts on this, Mike. You might tell me it's stupid. Maybe you do, and then I can stop getting my clients to do it. And this is in the hypertrophy app. So, many of my clients that train 6 days per week, some kind of variation of push-pull legs, I'll have them do the first 3 sessions as normal. And then they'll only have 1 session later in the week where they do a full body of what the app has prescribed for the final 3 sessions, but all in 1 session, because it's very short, very light pump work.
That is exactly what I do and exactly what I recommend.
Look at that.
Because the first 3 sessions are a little heavier. You got to warm up a little bit. They're kind of for real. But the last sessions are like, what the fuck is this? What a joke. And if you do it all in one day, it's like a 40-minute, very light whole body warm up. And if you only do it once at the end of the week, I mean, if you think about it, you go to the gym Friday, which means you have Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday to just chill. And that's a big deal. And some people say, man, I don't want to chill. Like, good. Use the chilling to piss you off. You're not in the gym again. You failure, fat fuck. You look like shit. You're getting weaker. You're getting smaller. Your dreams of being a good bodybuilder are dying every day that you sit on this couch and eat more food. And then you go into panic mode. Good, motherfucker. It's Monday. Panic mode. Mesocycle 2 starts. Good. Use that panic energy, because you'll need it, because you got 5 more weeks of that shit. And that's another thing, like a big difference between looking at this more, I would even say, as a kind of a professional athlete should look at it versus someone who's a hobbyist. A professional athlete on the Monday of mesocycle 2 after a deload, a hobbyist comes in and he says, let's go to fucking war. And then it's many sets, failure, whatever, crazy, inappropriately crazy soreness from excessive damage from way too much up front, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, you look at guys walking funny, like, first week back, man. I'm like, you're a fucking idiot. That's not how it works. How would a professional treat this? So they say, okay, I'm now recovered and fatigue reduced. I have another 5 weeks of accumulation in me. But the most difficult of those weeks is week 5. And the time where I need to work the hardest is also week 5. And in week 1, if I just do some basics, get a little close to failure, get a little pump, I'm actually checking the stimulus box like crazy because I'm currently in a state of mild detraining. And then so patience becomes the rule of the game. I'm going to do a great job this week. I'm going to beat that by a little bit in week 2. Week 3, I'm really turning it on. In week 4, it's all chaos and fire and brimstone and yelling and screaming and listening to Linkin Park in the parking lot for 10 minutes before you go into the gym. Whatever it is, whatever you need to get you going. Counting crows. I'm kidding. That was an odd reference. Pearl Jam for 1 hour. I'm kidding. Oh my God. I would just kill myself and not even get into the gym. So, you know, then it's like when to turn it up. So a lot of being an advanced athlete and an advanced client to be coached by others is to really have patience. There's like that fucking wolf scene in 300, you know, when he's talking about like he goes out and he's like 12 and he kills a insanely oversized, not species of wolf I've ever seen in Greece type of shit. And they talk about the wolf and they're like, he's patient. Like, it was one of the things they said. And I was like, man, you got a patient predator on you. You're really in deep shit. Is that like an alligator is not patient? Is just going to go, ah, and you back away from the river. He's like, I forget you exist, you know, but something that stalks you, that's a problem. And you got to stalk your training. You know, you've got to be like week 1, doing the job. Week 2, up the ante. Week 3, I got to be present. And also week 4, you want to be an athlete, you want to show off, you want to be a great psychologist in training, and you talk about war, you talk about fucking trying hard. Oh, what's that, pussy? All right, here's week 4, you little bitch. And now you're tired, and now you don't have a high desire to train, and now you need to put the exclamation mark on your whole mesocycle of training. How tough are you now? And oh, by the way, all the sets are to failure or very close, like you wanted. Oh no, but there's 6 of them, not 2. Wait, it's too much for you? Oh my God, I thought you were a real man. I thought you cook your steak raw or whatever the fuck. Now it's time to find out who the fuck is up for it. You got to be patient. You got to be better than a man. You have to be a machine. That's really hard to do. The people that can do that the most, and I also find the people that psychologically stress over the process the least are generally the ones that get the best situation out of their training. They just don't fret or fuss one way or the other. They try as hard as the app tells them to try. You just keep doing that. You'll be the man. And replace app with coach. Same idea. Replace coach with knowledge in your head of what you know you're supposed to do. Show up. Get the fucking work done. Sometimes it's going to require you to really nut up and go and dig deep into those places, but many times it doesn't. If you train compulsively or reflexively to just do therapy for yourself, you're going to be great. You're going to be jacked. You're going to be lean. Everyone's going to think you're awesome. But if you want to look back on your bodybuilding career and say, I really did everything to high level levels I possibly could, then you're going to have to do some stuff where you hold back a little more than you want to at times, and then you push much harder than you want to at other times.
Yeah. And then how do you guys find this translate then into, say, a less than optimal environment, like a contest preparation where somebody is nutritionally devoid of sufficient calories to fuel these training bouts? Do you have preferences over the manipulation of, say, increasing set volume in the absence of being able to retain load, or a decrease in RIR towards the back end of prep in preference for managing fatigue or anything like this?
Let the guys go. I have all sorts of ideas about this, of course.
Yeah, I think the app takes care of a lot of that anyway, because if you're working with a lower status of recovery in your rate, and honestly, it's going to hold your volumes lower anyway. Generally, when dieting, MEVs are going to be a bit higher anyway. Even if you do start on the lower end, the app will mediate those upwards for you accurately based on stimulus proxy data, but also accurately based on stimulus proxy data, it will keep it lower as well. And there's a bit of a dichotomy as you get towards the end of prep. You know, we know that there's going to be more total net anabolism from training with higher training volumes and closer proximities to failure. But then, of course, there's a point where the systemic central fatigue is so high that I will eventually switch a client over to just maintenance training volume. But this is generally when the fat loss is done. You know, final 2 weeks of prep, they will be training with maintenance volume, effort, etc. But calories are coming up to maintenance at that point.
Makes a lot of sense.
So in the instance, let's just say someone is losing performance. I mean, technically, if you set the process up right, you have appropriate fatigue management, cetera, et cetera. In a perfect world, performance is relatively well trained to a well maintained to a point, right?
You're gonna drop performance in a prep. Loads inevitably are going to come down. Pressing movements, hack squats, leg press, it's coming down. And I think the over emotional gripping to trying to retain load at the expense of having to train to minus 10 RIR in a last ditch effort to try and hold that is far worse than just training to the prescribed RIR and not worrying about it so much and then rating it honestly.
Yeah, so your advice in that instance is to not disassociate, but maybe push to the side that you may be dropping load and or tonnage, but provided your proximity to failure is sufficient, then we should be retaining the tissue that we intend to.
If you're training with adequate volume to the prescribed reps in reserve, obviously it's not a goal for us to lose performance, for us to have a detriment to the amount of load that we can perform X amount of reps with. Anybody that's been in real contest shape knows that it's happening anyway. Can you really honestly name many bodybuilders that train properly that are able to retain absolute performance across the board to getting dick skin dialed in lean? I've never met anyone.
No, that's the point. Not absolute. Like I think absolute strength on certain movement patterns can be relatively well retained, but repeat performance set to set for sure is going to go back.
Yes.
So strength endurance across the sets will eventually start to take a hit. But at that point, that's where the game of matching stimulus to sequate muscle retention becomes apparent to an extent before that right back end where everything, hell sets on fire and everything goes to shit and you've got to do like 1 or 2 sets of things to get your fatigue back in check. There's a dance of increasing those additional volumes to sequate that same stimulus to match the performance to a degree. Obviously, it won't be the matching of load, but I think quite a lot of people go into contest prep and then they get 6 weeks in and they're like, oh bro, my pressing strength's dropped, my knees are fucked, my hack squat's gone down. And you look at them going, man, you're 6 weeks into a diet, your strength should still be somewhat trending up here. There's other stimulatory inputs from anabolism being transcribed with the increase in PEDs that are going to be doing something here. They will be doing something from a strength adaptation, the dosages that most people on contest prep are using. So there has to be like a fine battle of knowing when that strength drop off is going to happen with the individual and knowing when to call them out and say, actually, bro, you are training like, and to use my words, you're training like a little bitch. Like, you have to have that dance with them to kind of keep them performing in a suboptimal environment. You highlighted contest prep very well on a podcast in the past, Dean, where you said about what we expect of individuals is to perform as perfect as possible as athletes in the most suboptimal environment to achieve that net result at the end of it. But that's the battle to it. And there is a point in time where you have to make those few adjustments and just know adequately for that person when the right time to call it is. And like Joe said, it's when the fat loss is done, essentially. So up until that point, you're going to be pushing from a uncomfortable challenge the whole way through, essentially.
To me, on the enhanced side, there actually is a bit of manipulation you can do to make it so that performance doesn't fall off until maybe, like Joe said, the last 2 weeks where you don't care about it anyway because you're not trying to rip your pecs off your bone. It's a confluence of factors that can combine. I can think of at least a few of them. One is as you get leaner through a contest prep, your probability of getting much better at lower repetition work isn't so high anymore because you're more tired, etc. It's also been shown that a high degree of endurance type activity, AMPK systemic activity, tends to transition muscle fibers and their behavior marginally towards slower twitch variants. So your probability of being your most explosive and strong when your whole body is chronically getting a catabolic stimulus from AMPK activity being high is not very high. However, AMPK is an endurance moderator. So maybe if in the last few mesocycles of your prep, you can choose higher rep ranges. First of all, I'm a big fan of this. In general, higher, just slightly higher than average, because your probability of injury is going to be lower, period. Injury probability scales almost exclusively with how much load you're using. And also it can allow you psychologically to be happy that you're making PRs because you can still make PRs on reps, like adding reps to sets versus adding load. And it's been shown, at least in one of the studies that I was on with Brad Schoenfeld, that you get the same results with adding reps versus adding load, which makes sense. Like you just keep getting closer to failure. The body doesn't really care if it's more load or more reps as long as it's heavy enough. So I think progressing on reps in slightly higher rep ranges as you go through your prep might allow you to continue to hit PRs, even though you're like, well, I leg pressed a lot for 8 reps in the off season, but I just hit a 20 rep leg press PR here 3 weeks before a contest. Can I hit that same 8 rep PR? Fuck no. But could I hit this 20 rep PR in my fat ass off season shape? Fuck, I would die of a heart attack at rep 18. That would never happen. It's a different kind of PR. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is understand that because you're in contest prep, you're not going to be able to make the magnitude of jumps that you're typically used to making in off season, for example. So just make your jumps smaller. Instead of adding 5 pounds to the bar, add 2.5 pounds to the bar. Instead of going up by 2 reps from this week to next week, go up by 1 rep. And then that way you can continue to get stronger, just not as fast. It checks the box psychologically of I'm still improving, but it doesn't bite off more than it can chew. You know, if you hate getting rejected by women, just ask out billionaire, already married supermodel women, and you'll get rejected all the time. It'll be awful. But if you ask women that you know are likely to say yes, you just have a good time all the time. It's your call how you set yourself up for that. If you like to win fist fights, don't come up to Andrew Tate and punch him in the face. He's kind of kickboxing world champ. He'll probably beat you up. But you know, if some asshole in the gym's talking shit, he looks like Harry Potter, you know what I'm saying? It's time to get to cracking. So guys will say, I still want to hit PRs and still feel stronger than ever. Okay, well, are you okay getting stronger a little bit slower, maybe much slower, maybe in a higher rep range? Okay, cool. And the other part, 2 other parts I can think of the equation. One is if you're losing a lot of strength fast, you're probably doing what I did in my last contest prep, which was never fill out and never recover. Just under eat like crazy until you're flat. And then your flat look is flat. And then that look flattens out even more. And then your body's not changing at all one way or another for 4 or 6 weeks because your body's like, fuck this, I'm starving, I'm out. Then you can lose lots of strength. The real way to prep intelligently is to take periods of flattening out, distinct runs of a hypocaloric stimulus, and then distinct runs of slight at surplus or small surplus or maintenance eating to reconstitute, to get the fatigue back down, to fill out again. And then that way, actually, you don't tend to lose a lot of strength. So George said earlier, it's like if you're losing tons of strength, especially early, that's not contest prep doing it. That's you fucking up in some other kind of regard. So there's a lot to say for that. And lastly, the difference in PED implementation on average through contest prep, especially with escalation, should make up a great deal of that difference for PED users. So, yes, it is actually possible to be your strongest ever 2 weeks before you step on stage, even peeled. I've seen tons of bodybuilders post videos of this, posting 2 rep maxes on the fucking incline bench 2 weeks out of a show with striations everywhere. Is that a good idea? Fuck no, that's the stupidest idea ever. But listen, ideas are fun things to have until you have enough halotestin in your bloodstream. You're not a person of ideas anymore. You're a person of actions. And the action is either rip a dog's face off or you go bench your 2 rep max at an incline 2 weeks out. So a lot of times when you have trend factoring in, I mean, Broderick Chavez says something effective. On average, very grand average, a contest prep total gear per week should be roughly 1.5 times what it is in the off season, so to speak. With a 1.5 time increase on average, you might get just stronger, and then you have to do higher reps. You have to take it slowly because the strength you get just from the gear and not running your diet totally into the ground can become like kind of a little scary, especially when trend is in the mix. I mean, fuck, man. Towards the end of prep, you might be like, holy shit, I'm the strongest I've ever been. I better slow the fuck down. And I think actually that's one of the reasons you get catastrophic injuries with lots of bodybuilders is you throw in enough trend and halo, they just want to do dumb shit and they're strong enough to do dumb shit and then they get hurt. I've bringing this up in 2 podcasts in a row. I feel like a dick. Do you guys remember Zach Khan from the United Kingdom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually wrote a training plan for Zach Khan like 4 years.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
hopefully
he was
not
like
the one he broke himself on.
No, it wasn't.
That was a little before that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, well, he ended up tearing both his quads on a hack squat. And look, that wasn't from sets of 15 to 20 reps. That was like hack squat, for sets of 4 or some shit like that. You're going to want to do shit like that when you're enhanced. So it's, to me, the question isn't even as much if you're running things properly of how do you deal with not being stronger anymore through prep. To me, the question is, if you're taking the right amount of gear and you're properly incrementing your strength and higher repetition ranges, how do you mitigate having the strength to go too far and hurt yourself and cause way too much fatigue? To me, prep is more a matter of, I just need to hit these little mini PRs and that's good enough because I'm enough gear to feel like I can move the earth. That depends on a lot of stuff.
Nath Heckles rowing 4 plates aside for like 15 reps 1 week out, the true athlete. See that video? I was like, dude, you are like an ape. How the fuck are you doing that? He's a mutant. He's ridiculous, man.
Was that good technique or what?
It's acceptable.
Oh wow.
Maybe not to you. It's Nath Heckle's technique. To be fair, he's got probably one of the best backs in the UK. So I'm not gonna.
Something. The strength's coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
Everyone's gonna start
Dean,
again now.
Dean, I've realised we're already 20 minutes over time. We didn't cover a single question that you got on Instagram.
Well, you can rapid fire. I've got a few of them kept it. So
let's go, man.
Some
Let's
of them
wrap
aren't
it
super
off.
short. All right. One of the questions then, Joe, this one I'll push to you first. What does the research say on injectable L-carnitine versus, say, application? And do you think its effects, if any, I will say, translate to natties?
Well, the first thing I'll say, because this is rapid fire, is we've got a 2-part L-carnitine video coming out next week on Physique Collective on what it does, how to use it, what forms are applicable, blah, blah, blah. And they're long form. So watch that. Hold on, let's break that question down. What does it do? Is that part of it? Talking about L-carnitine fat loss? Yeah. Okay, really simply, oversimplification, break down the beta oxidation process, mobilization, transport of free fatty acid, and then eventually oxidation. Various lipolytic drugs assist in each part of this process. You could have growth hormone, yohimbine over here on mobilization. You could have clenbuterol and thyroid drugs over here on oxidation. Where L-carnitine shines is in the transport of these free fatty acids into the mitochondria to then be moved to be oxidized. So, and that's where synergy is created. If you can enhance all of these parts of the lipolysis equation, then you have a kind of 1 + 1 = 5 effect. Does it translate to natties? I don't know. It's an amino acid suspended in water. Is that a PED? I don't know.
Yes, you're injecting it, motherfucker. What's wrong with people? Oh, I'm natty, but I only inject carnitine. The fuck out of my face. If I find needles in your fucking drawer, you're not natty. God damn it. This whole thing with natties, looking for natty supplements, natty. Like, I've seen a guy's natty stack, and he's like, it's like 50 different things, like terrestris and different kind of roots. Motherfucker, you're not natty. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Joe makes a great point there. Injectable is the only form worth considering. The bioavailability and the uptake of oral L-carnitine is dreadful. And there's some interesting literature on oral L-carnitine being able to cross... I'll have to pull it up on Physique Collective. I can't remember. There's some kind of peripheral tissue crossing involved that is suboptimal. George might know, but injectable, 200 to 500 milligram per day. Any more than 500 milligram, you're starting to tread into the regions of thyroidal axis dysregulation.
And does the injection pathway mitigate its potential requirements of insulin and or like muscle contraction to help with its delivery still?
Well, that's going to depend on the mechanism you're searching for. If you're using it as a cofactor of insulin for glucose disposal, then endogenous insulin works just fine. Exogenous insulin, if you want super physiological glucose disposal, will work better. Yeah, but for its role in lipolysis, it's not insulin dependent.
Cool. Maintaining insulin sensitivity in the off season. Tips. Don't get fat.
Yeah, don't be fat or use excessively high doses of growth hormone. Consider using a basal insulin.
What are excessively high doses, Joe? I have to ask.
Well, I've got clients that use 10 units of growth hormone year round, and we track Homer IR every 8 to 12 weeks, and it's great. But I also don't like to get my clients this is a subject to me, too fat. Am I going to say that? Like, rarely would I run more than 3 massing mesocycles without a mini cut there. We're not moving that far away from things. And I find if you're eating like you should be, and you're using metformin and a basal insulin and keeping a certain degree of baseline expenditure in there and training properly and managing sleep and stress, I think it's harder than people think to become like systemically insulin resistant.
Yeah. Well, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong here too, Joe. Like, from memory, like the numbers played out like in dwarfism research and individuals that are given like tremendous amounts of growth hormone to try and engage that growth, right? Is that the ceiling effect to insulin resistance in the first 3 months of use was somewhere around the 3 IU per 100 kilos. However, that was completely eradicated after 3 months and went back to baseline.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's a bit of contention about what we mean when we say insulin resistance, because specifically we're talking about adipocyte insulin resistance with growth hormone. And is that a bad thing? Maybe, if we consider that the more reliable pathway might end up being visceral fat storage, if that becomes an issue. But is that just a product of the insulin resistance? Maybe. But having insulin resistant adipocytes is one of the ways that growth hormone keeps you leaner. I haven't seen any good evidence to suggest like muscle cell insulin sensitivity locally from growth hormone use. So,
are we all allowed to pitch into these, or these are just for Joe so far?
No, these are just questions in
they're for
general on IG.
everyone.
I didn't want to be a dick and like, I'll take that one. To me, the off-season question for insulin resistance is boils down to two very simple things. One is don't get needlessly fat. And two is stay at a nice level of overall physical activity, assuming you're, of course, training hard. But for me, when I peg my lowest steps during a muscle gain phase at 10,000, during a fat loss phase, they're at 12,000 a day. At 10,000, man, I can fucking stay so goddamn lean. But if I let it drop to, this is my office, I'd go nowhere. I'd do 2,000 steps a day. I've done that before. Getting fat is just way easier. Not just fat, but insulin resistant, because even adiposity aside, a highly daily activity is huge for nutrient flux and for keeping blood glucose levels managed and all this other great stuff. So stay active and stay on the leaner side of things. And the probability that you will develop insulin resistance is profoundly small, very rare. There was a guy, but geez, a generation back called, what was his name? Ronnie Weller or something. He was a German guy. He got full blown like type 2 diabetes from seemed like growth hormone abuse. The Europeans, the continental Europeans love their growth hormone.
Yes.
Yes. you coach someone from Switzerland to like, yes, 24 units per hour. You're like, I'm sorry, what? But it's how Marcus Rule did it. But outside of that, it's just profoundly difficult. Now I will say, like, on the other end, there's guys who will step on stage at, gee whiz, 105 kilos, and you'll see them at like 135 kilos in their off season, and they're huffing and puffing upstairs, and they're like, yeah, man, gotta take that berberine to keep that insulin sensitivity up. I'm like, berberine is swimming in a flood of your fat ass being way too out of shape. Are you out of your fucking mind? How many steps do you get a day? And they're like, yeah, just walk from the car to the gym and then back to the car. Like, okay, you're gonna die really soon. So I think to me, and actually I can simplify this, once you begin to use a growth hormone, you should have clear six-pack year round, and variations within that will get you as muscular as you ever need to be. And if you think that muscle gain is at the other end of 300 pounds, even though you've got like spare tire, sloppy, and you can't see your abs anymore, yeah, you might gain some muscle going up there, but it's not a compelling amount. You'll have to diet it off like crazy, and it's not very good for your health. No, I don't think that's the case.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, in application, after coaching now for 8 years or something like that, I've never seen anybody produce blood work that indicates any form of insulin resistance, even in individuals that I have had at 1,200 grams of carbs per day for months. Yep. But the catch is that almost all of them are at least moderately active. Like you mentioned, Mike, the minimum I'd probably have would be like 8,000 for somebody, but most are around the 10, and they're all training hard. They're all nutrient dense, nutrient diverse diets. Like when you tick all the boxes, it just doesn't eventuate. I think people largely try and isolate carbohydrates as the issue, as opposed to it being an energy over availability issue.
The way Joe, I'm sure, love this. I mean, nodding in agreement. He loves shit like this. He's a fucking nerd. In almost all of the rodent models in which they have for generations tested insulin dynamics and diabetes dynamics, the traditional model to impose diabetes on the animal is saturated fat overfeeding. They just put more saturated fat in their chow, and there's more carbohydrates available around that aren't being taken into cells because the fats beat them to it. So there's just the displacement effect going on. But basically, it's like an excessive amount of calories is what causes insulin resistance. The carbohydrates matter profoundly little. You can make animals insulin resistant on a low carbohydrate diet if you just overfeed them saturated fats and they just sit in a fucking cage, they become diabetic. So the carbohydrates are the method by which diabetes illness is expressed and modulated after its expression, but it's not really how you get there. Like my dad told me a thing once. He's like, it's kind of an urban legend. He's like, oh, I heard the guys at the candy store, the guys who work there just have really high rates of diabetes. And I tell you, that is an urban legend. It's almost certainly not true. Give me some skinny meth head guy that works at the candy store unboxing crates. Even if he's allowed to eat all the candy he wants, he might even eat a lot of candy. But he's like 6'3" and he weighs 70 kilos and you can see his veins, and he does not have fucking diabetes. He's too active and takes too much methamphetamine. I guess what I'm saying is take meth if you don't want diabetes. It's just good for you in general. It's good for your friendships. Think about your career.
Say no to
metformin. Analogs in the coaching world are most definitely something used. Dean, I'm running for a pee. I'll be back in 1 minute.
All right, mate, no worries. Yeah,
Time to go take meth. I'm kidding.
I mean, it'll be quick if he comes back. This is the problem. He's puffing the vape now. People think he's puffing the pipe.
Vape, pipe, it's all the same to me. You guys are all degenerate drug addicts.
Did you? Oh, there, Mike. Did you? Well, Josette, did you use any interventions for like hunger management, like nicotine or stimulants or anything like that during your last contest prep?
Me personally,
Yeah,
I don't mix well with stimulants. I just get very anxious. And since I already get a lot of anxiety from gear, it's the absolutely last thing I need is stimulants. But I did use semaglutide or semaglutide or however the fuck you guys call it to insanely great effect. What a miracle drug. Holy shit. I'm beyond blown away. And we're going to try tirzepatide next because it's the Gen 4. I was just like, I mean, using stimulants for their anorectic effects, using stimulants for their appetite reducing effects, unless you have a compelling reason, and you might, to use stimulants for other reasons, like, pre-workout energy, mental focus throughout the day, slight enhancement of fat liberation, unless you have a compelling reason to use stimulants for any other reason, I would say the era of using stimulants primarily to modulate hunger is over or is coming to an end because the modern anorectics, and I've actually done a deep dive on the research on this recently. I can expound beyond anything reasonable, but the Ozempic or semaglutide and tirzepatide, they're just the beginning and they're already so fucking overpowered. For most people, a certain dose of GLP-1 GIP agonists at a certain given dose will make you look at food and just really only intellectually understand why people eat food at all. You just don't want to eat food anymore. And so you can use it as a turn dial throughout prep to make sure hunger is just never an issue, which is such a beautifully liberating thing because you could just focus on eating the macros and meals like you're supposed to for the other rest of your physiology. I think it's fucking wonderful.
Yeah, for anybody that's interested on Physique Collective, we've got a thread called GLP-1 agonist research reviews and experiences. And I've, over a long period of time, have worked through every individual study. Now we've got a few more interesting reviews on the various types and whatnot. I'm extremely interested in some of the new generation of GLP-1 agonists coming out.
Joe, have you seen the research on compound 12?
So Holly Davidge, who's what would her job title be? Research analyst or something. So she goes to all of these big. She works for, is it Pfizer she was working for? I don't know if she still is now.
During the COVID vaccinations, yeah, she was doing trials with them.
Yeah, so she was at one of their conferences the other day and she was telling me they were doing a thing on this. I haven't done a dive on it yet. Sounds almost nuclear though. Compound.
Dude, so real quick, is it okay if I rant for 30 seconds or something?
Please do. I'm very interested in this.
30 seconds. When have you ever ranted for 30 seconds, Mike?
30 minutes later, I'm like, shut the fuck up, Mike. So real quick, just for folks not in the know, so there's the drugs, general drug classes called anorectics, and drugs that make you want to eat less. Very, very simple. And a bunch of drugs have anorectic side effects or main effects. So these the new drugs on the market, so to speak, are the GLPs, and they are essentially interacting with one receptor site, and it more or less ... tells your body like, I'm full early, I don't want to eat any more food. That was generation 3. There's actually 2 generations before of GLP agonists that don't work nearly as well. So Gen 3 is semaglutide. Then you have Gen 4, which is tirzepatide, aka Manjaro, and that interacts with GLP receptor and the GIP receptor, which is 2, so it's dual mode of action, and it's just better. I've talked to a few people that have used tirzepatide after using semaglutide, and they're like, this is a step up, like something qualitatively different about the hunger suppression. I was like, holy shit, like for me, semaglutide is more than enough, but apparently it's even further. Now they have multiple companies and multiple drugs in testing that are 3 pathway drugs, and one of them called compound 12, which is fucking sweet. That's like some kind of military shit they don't want you to know about. I tell you what, I ain't taking no compound 12, goddammit. Anyway, it's a GLP agonist, GIP agonist, and a glucagon agonist. And the glucagon action somehow, and Joe, good luck figuring this one out, as I have no fucking idea how this works. The glucagon effect seems to express itself in a baseline increase in energy expenditure in laboratory animals without concomitant increase in their movement. So, and there's no stimulant-like effect here. So it's not like the rats are sitting there like fucking shaking and freaking out. They're just burning more calories being alive, and they don't even move anymore. Because if you get rats, feed them coke or methamphetamine, they burn a lot more calories just because they move around the cage all the time. They don't move any more than other laboratory animals. So they seem to, starting now, pharmaceuticals are starting to really crank on those deep control rods in the human body, so to speak, that they're cranking up expenditure at a cellular level. So you don't even get like anxiety or anything as a side effect, hypothetically. So now we have a drug in compound 12. I guess it's a generation 5 GLP agonist is already like the generations are fucked because it's not just GLP, it's GLP, GIP, and glucagon. Now what it does is it has a 2-factor way of reducing your appetite and a 1-factor way of increasing your energy expenditure at the same time. This is nuts. Oh, and by the way, it's something you inject once a week and you're totally good to go. And it's wild. And this is the future of appetite control. It's the beginning of the end of obesity. I'm the most optimistic person you'll talk to about all these drugs, because it's not like we have these drugs and now they're working and everything's great. Like, how many advances have there been in caffeine since Coca-Cola started making it? Well, not really. It's still the same substance. The amount of money to be made in pharmaceuticals from treating obesity is fucking infinite. So all these companies, now that Ozempic has succeeded and now that Mounjaro has succeeded, they're like, holy fuck. Hey, diabetes guys, do we have any research lines on GLPs? Like, yeah, fuck, we have a whole division we abandoned 3 years ago. Like, fucking start it up again, god damn it. So these new compounds are hitting like crazy. Of course, you have like protein sequencing and AI stuff helping with the compounds. So the better ideas for what drugs come next are now amplified. In the next 5 years or so, appetite will be, I think, a solved problem.
I wonder if that expenditure input is some kind of insulinogenic, like ATP mediated heat transfer input.
I wonder, man. I wonder
because of energy availability.
Yeah, that would be my hypothesis without knowing any more.
I think that's a pretty good note to finish on. It's a banger of a finish.
Way too much.
I cannot stress how useful semaglutide has been in my coaching experiences in individuals in almost esoteric ways, completely unrelated to the success of their fat loss. Some crazy things, improvements on sleep and stress management.
Yes.
I just talked to guys in the garden about, well, this is the GLP-1 receptors in the brain action, right? These individuals aren't waking up through the night with this kind of cortisol-mediated food-seeking behavior. Sorry, Mike, go on.
No, real quick. So there may very well be actual interaction of the receptor in the brain, and thus all the benefits there. But I think at least some of the benefits are secondary to the effect of reducing crazy hunger, just psychologically. Yeah. So like if you're not fucking ravenous, your stress levels, one of the worst things about hunger is that it causes stress. Stress is terrible for your prep, and sufficiently hungry, you'll wake up early, you won't be able to fall asleep. I found that my own use of semaglutide, I was as buried into the bone, depleted as I have ever been, sleeping 8 hours a night. What the fuck is this possible? I would even have food dreams, but then I would wake up and I'm not consciously hungry and I just go back to sleep. So my part of my brain's ancestral, like, wake up, you idiot, we're starving to death, motherfucker. But I don't care. And so that the decreased stress, here's another one. You're around friends and family and they're eating tasty foods. You're in contest prep. You're not on semaglutide. It's stressful, bro. You're like in a fucking religious battle to resist temptation and demons and shit. You're on semaglutide, they're eating pizza and they're like, you want some? Or is it okay if we're eating in front of you? You're like, I don't care. It looks pretty good. Like, do you want a slice? Like, no, I'm okay. It's a really, really big deal. Yeah,
and you can only think of compounding positive effects on the physique when you've got this much parasympathetic tone expression additional per day, you know, and even the interesting research on addictive behaviors with people that have used GLP-1 agonists. It's like habitual cocaine use, or alcoholics that use GLP-1 agonists and seen attenuation in addiction status is unbelievable. So yeah. Anyway, sorry, I could ramble on that forever.
Me too. Well, no, wrong two people to have here.
No, they're the perfect two people. The secondary stuff is what really interests me, and especially even in that post-competition phase, because I think, like, psychologically, you should at least have had the discussion with yourself internally to determine whether or not you are in the right position to handle a contest prep in the absence of drugs like this. And then you use them as a tool, not as a band-aid for your previous disordered thoughts and behaviors and so on. But there is just no denying that the post-competition phase is incredibly difficult for even some of the strongest willed individuals. And I think, being able to slowly transition somebody out there alongside some education could be incredibly advantageous for minimizing the likelihood of eating disorder or disordered eating behaviors in that post-competition phase. Because there's a lot of people that compete and shouldn't.
And needless fat gain and stuff. I mean, I've reversed out with semaglutide for the first time this time, and oh my god, it's a fucking dream. Because you have your cheat meal or whatever, and it's not like, oh my god, I just want more of this forever. You're like, that was really good. I couldn't even finish it. I had to take it home, put it in the fridge, eat it tomorrow. Like, that already establishes such a normal-esque behavior. And the pre-contest period and the post-contest period. Also, another thing about semaglutide is that it is insulin sensitizing and actually drives more insulin. So it's kind of like its own you can use semaglutide in the rebound with growth hormone and lots of calories, and the semaglutide is kind of fighting off the insulin resisting effects of growth hormone, actually to a huge extent, because it was originally designed to do only that. So even aside from its appetite effects, oh my god, Joe, that is so fucking adorable. How am I supposed to focus on talking? Well, oh my god, he's licking you. Is it a he or a she?
These dogs, it's he. This is my Staffy Hunter.
Oh my
He will-
god.
He will
He'd sit
clean
like
him
this, you know?
forever.
Yeah, he's the
Oh
best
my
dog ever. This
God.
one.
Oh my god, he's so sweet. He got his paws on you.
Hey, Mike, he has osteogenesis imperfecta. So
What the hell is that?
So every bone in his body is brittle and every joint has spurs. So he's actually licking his foot here because it's causing him discomfort. He's not looking.
Oh no.
Yeah,
You would
he's
never
not-
know because he's a little beast.
Well, Dean, he's in a bit of a bad at the minute. He goes in
Okay, so
some troughs.
You
But
just
yeah,
gotta love him
he's
harder, Joe.
had a good life though. He's done some crazy shit.
The definition of
yeah, he is a good little boy. All right, let's rapid fire this bad boys at the end, guys. We always finish the podcast with a be less shit tip. So I will kick it off with you, Joe. A be less shit tip on something either relating to the content we've had or just in general life, mate. If you want to give some, philosophical line or quote or something.
Yeah, so I didn't think of this prior. I'll maybe make it a little bit philosophical for you. Something I've been thinking a lot about recently is intellectual arrogance and trying to be very self-aware of my own intellectual arrogance if it would present. So I think maybe be less shit tip would be try to have yourself in a position where you know how subordinate you are to something, right? And that could be on any position of your life. The more you research things anyway, the more you'll research, the more you'll learn how subordinate you are to actual true knowledge. Coaching world is rife with intellectual arrogance, as is the philosophical world, as is the political world. And my be less shit tip would be to daily ponder on how little you actually know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was one of the first lessons you taught me, Joe, was as much as you learn in this industry, remember that there's a whole field of research and science that's constantly moving and ebbing and flowing that you have to keep up with. So you never truly know everything about bodybuilding, physique development. You have to continually keep learning, like we're in a constant state of university as we go through life.
Which is the fun part about it. I would hate to think like I knew everything, you know. Mike, be less shit tip for the just so you know, Mike, it's called this because this podcast is how to be less shit. So we're just teaching people that.
Yeah. Try to learn everything so that you can be arrogant, but objectively so. Yeah. Humans don't know enough. Learn more things. Be less shit. No, I'm kidding. That's fucked up. You know, for me, it's anytime you think that your emotional reaction to a situation that requires a logical reaction is correct and that it feels good, you should take a step back and pause and understand that it probably isn't the correct reaction. Especially on gear, you can feel kind of like a sense of like offended righteousness, like how dare that person? I know things and I'm an expert and I'm right, and you're just having a lot of feelings. And if you step back and think, okay, what about logically? Even though this person may have phrased their thing to me in a way that's mildly offensive, getting offended is what an animal does, is what a child does. And adults don't get offended. They just understand where something's coming from and take it as it is. And the worst possible thing that you could ever happen to you with someone deeply offends you on the internet or says you don't know things is you go, oh, that's an interesting opinion, maybe some validity. That's it. That's it. The whole debate's over. There's nothing else to talk about after that. So a lot of times when you have a lot of feelings about something, my advice is be less of a feelings person and more of a let the feelings come and go and then think a little bit more.
Beautiful. And also part of the wrap up is something worth sharing that you think would be valuable to the listeners as well. We'll go same order, Joe.
Well, listeners, I have just released my first ever ebook all about the wonderful magical molecule called clenbuterol. It is available for pre-sale on physiquecollective.com for only £14.99. On the 1st of September, it goes up to £19.99. It's a big book. Well, it's only 19 pages, so it's not that big, but it is everything you could ever want to know about clenbuterol and some bits in there I guarantee you guys haven't ever seen or heard before, with practical recommendations. etc., etc. So please buy it so I can join Mike on a road trip in our Lamborghinis, right off into an anabolic sunset.
The only kind of sunset I'm interested in.
Having read it, I can attest to the fact that it is a great read, and I know George is of the same opinion. Well, if not, I'm just forcing to say yes.
He proofread it, and Dean, you were the only person that proofread it that actually gave criticisms on amendments, and they were really useful criticisms. The amendments.
I better be in the forward. Is all I'll say. No, I'm joking.
I'll asterisk this. I just got my copy to read and proofread, so I'll let you know.
Mike, something worth sharing, mate. I mean, we've already spoken about the RP app, so
I think we just skipped George, didn't we?
We're going to go back to him if he's got one. I didn't give him a heads up, so I didn't want to put him on the spot. But if he's got one, he can throw it out there after you're done.
I can think of two things.
Fuck.
Good, yeah.
Both questions, though, like 1 and 2.
Something. I mean, I think my rant about GLP agonists maybe already enough for people to take away. Okay. See earlier in the podcast when I ranted about GLP agonists. No, but yeah, for real. Just on that note, really quick. There are subscribe to the Physique Collective because why? Because that's a place where you're going to find out new stuff about drugs, and there is a just barely beginning to rise as a swell in the ocean wave of non-androgenic anabolics and non-stimulant based anorectics and fat loss drugs that are going to change the very face of our industry. There's that bimagrumab or whatever the fuck it's called, barely able to pronounce, and it's you have to the study they injected it once a month for about a year, and the participants lost huge fractions of their body fat and gained muscle at the same time with no resistance training and nothing, and all the health markers going through the roof. So these monoclonal antibodies are just getting fucking wild, and it's just going to be really crazy times ahead in the next 5 years, specifically for pharmaceutical interventions for physique enhancement. And when I go to find out stuff like that people actually use in the real world with all those guidelines is, of course, the Physique Collective. I wouldn't come to me for that shit because I barely know anything about it.
Let me repay the favor by telling anybody that trains with any level of seriousness should absolutely get on the RP Hypertrophy app. And I choose to use it. And you know what, Mike? I still pay for it. I pay full price. I gave my wife my free copy, but I still pay for the Hypertrophy because I genuinely couldn't train without it. But if you guys are going to buy it, please use code Physique so that I can buy my Lamborghini.
George, I'll get you to throw yours out there, but I'll just even this the be less shit tip. If you are using the RP app, the one thing I will say is you need to give time. I've had a couple of people attempt to use it and then just go, within 2 weeks, try and grab the 30-day return because they're like, the progressions aren't what I thought they should be. And I'm like, well, part of AI is it needs to learn. So give it time. Having made it to week 5 now, I have to say they're pretty much nailed by numbers, even though I felt like at the beginning they didn't quite nail them as well because it learns. That's the whole point. And now having actually dipped into a book recently called Noise, I'm quickly learning to be reminded of the fact that our perception of how great our minds are at making educated decisions on simple projections is largely beaten by almost all simple progression models. And we suck at doing it, so rely a little bit more on objectivity. George.
I was going to say, should we get out of the way of Joe and Mike's little love train we've got going on here? I feel like we're really on
it's pornographic at this point. Well, actually, it's obscene.
George, I know a really good coach. He's got a great beard. So if anyone's looking for somebody, there's this website. It's called Flex Success. There you
go. Oh, mate, my be less shit tip. I know this is a hard thing for quite a lot of people to do, but the further you can detach or remove your emotional attachment to training, the better you are going to progress when you can look at things objectively and see what needs to be done as opposed to what you want to do. So that'd be my be less shit tip. Put an emotional attachment on progression, and if that is where your emotional attachment is, you'll do whatever the fuck you need to do to get the job done. Something worth sharing that's more of a future, something worth sharing. I've actually made some, Joe obviously knows I've been speaking to him about this recently, but I've actually started to make some good headway on my HRT book. I'm writing with a little bit of a somewhat controversial input into female bodybuilding, and obviously a good highlight over the realm of HRT from the female aspect, and hopefully bring forth some good education to most of the world in the female space that definitely could quite deserve it.
All of them.
How do you write a book about take 5 milligrams of Anavar every day for 2 weeks? What is wrong with you? Do you say that in different languages or something?
George, I want the ebook on how to create transcendent experiences using psychedelic molecules.
Oh, I've been trying that for years, man. It's fun.
It's part of the discovery. And of course, the final question, because we always have to end with something fucked up, is a would you rather. I mean, this has come full circle from the circle jerk conversation. And the would you rather that I will pose to everybody is as follows. You are 1 inch inside of your mother and your dad is 1 inch inside of you. Do you push back or push forward to get out of the situation?
Is there a third option where you can do both back and forth?
I mean, you could. You know what's great about this, Mike, is I'm the host, so I don't have to answer.
Beautiful. Backwards. But, I'm going all the way back.
All the way back.
Yeah.
All right, Joe's pushing back.
I'm far too close with my mother.
In one way, it's I mean, in both ways, it's still incest, but in one way, it's a little bit less gay. So it's like, what do you take? Do you take the demolished relationship with your mother, or do you just never talk to your dad again? And assuming most dads are quite toxic masculine men, they probably don't talk much anyway. So I'm gonna go backwards because I know mine probably wouldn't talk to me anyway. So I'm not at a loss here, really.
I hate to be boring, but I'm gonna have to go backwards, but much further than 1 inch, because I've been wanting it from Daddy for so long, and finally my dreams come true. And I want Mom to see it happen. I want her to see the ecstasy in my eyes as I push back into.
Spin round before the full submission occurs.
Oh, yeah, everyone's helping each other out. It's a family affair. God damn it, if my parents ever fucking see this shit, please, God, Dad, don't find this podcast.
Mike is pushing back and turning over, is what I'm hearing. So then you can see the ecstasy in your father's eyes at the same time.
We're trying to recreate the Eiffel Tower.
Mike laying his dad down and jumping on top so he can watch him in the eyes.
That's a great idea. I'm going to write that down.
Gentlemen, it has been an absolute pleasure. I think if you're coming on, First Coaches Roundtable, what a cracker. All of the things that we've mentioned will be in the show notes, as well as where to find people if you want to find them. Engaged.
Even the last one?
I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah. That's
so sweet.
At the top, aren't you?
We put it all in there. No, gentlemen, absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, guys.